Hello, everyone. Welcome to an all-new year of Global. We're so glad to have you back with us reviewing, because, as you know, it is that time in our unit where we already have to have a test about some of the material that we've obviously reviewed this past summer. So, not just this past summer, but also at the end of the year after the global regions were completed. So there is that to deal with, and also some of the things that have been we've been going over just this past first week of school. So we'll cover that all for you, and you may not do as good because this is definitely a tough test. The beginning of the year test is a tough test, but you will do pretty well. Your score will improve than it could have been once you listen to this podcast. So trust me, worthy investment. So let's get right into it, starting with the Americas. It never really was the Americas. We don't really know what the Indians called it before Amerigo Vespucci, a explorer from Europe, came over and was really one of the first to realize that, hey guys, this isn't India as Christopher Columbus thought. Then for the rest of the time, it was named the Americas, which is a pretty cool thing to have. You're the guy who literally was the reason why the Americas are called the Americas. Like, that's a pretty cool thing to have on your legacy, in my opinion. But anyway, that was many, many years later than where we're going to start. 15 to 60,000 years ago, where the quote-unquote Indians, native people, whatever you want to call them, first people, whatever, they came through what we believe to be multiple methods, which include coming across the kind of land bridge that exists many, many years ago between Alaska and Russia, sailing in boats from Australia and some of the surrounding islands around Australia, and through other methods as well. So they came over here a long, long time before any Europeans even knew about this place, and they began to kind of settle in. They really had quite the hold on the North American and South American continents, snaking all the way down deep into the southern part of South America. So that made it all the less surprising when, as we begin to study some of these things and learn even more and more about them years and years and years after they happened, we kind of get the idea that these 100 million natives, when Christopher Columbus first set foot on the Americas, there were 100 million natives. They really were products of their environment, and Europeans didn't understand their culture because they had a lack of religion, among other things. They were just behaved very differently. They didn't have a lot of the technological advancements that the Europeans had, such as steel, ships, guns, horses, and even the wheel they didn't have. So the Europeans really came in playing at just kind of another level here. But these Native American cultures, they were very, very different. Over 2,000 different individual cultures that were, like, not just, they did have some similarities, but 2,000 separate cultures that we're going to kind of lump together for our own purposes. Several hundred different languages, inhabited, again, very extremely different environments. The mid-Atlantic coast people were the Lenape, the western Great Lake country, Western Great Lakes country called themselves the Lakota, and the southwestern nomads kind of called themselves the Dine, or the Dina. No single physical type or characterization could be placed on these people. Again, 100 million people, it's kind of hard to put a single descriptor. It's not just the red skin kind of description that the native or the Europeans had when they came over, because they just didn't know how to process it. And even if they did, I think you could make the pretty strong case that they wouldn't have cared and still viewed them the exact same way, even if they did understand the culture, because they were standing in the way of their own conquest, personal goals, riches, glory, etc. So the truth is here that germs were way, way more effective than any war power, any guns, any ships, any bombs, or any kind of brute force that the Europeans could use. They brought over all these crazy germs. The natives, who really did live quite a complex and sanitary lifestyle, a lot more so than the Europeans, like, they didn't really know how to handle it. They didn't have anywhere near the scale of diseases, and people just started dropping dead the moment the natives came over, which the Spaniards and other Europeans, they kind of thought that was a sign from God. They're like, he's clearing the way for us. We will dominate because literally our enemies are dropping dead before us. Like, and if you have a mind at that time, it kind of makes sense why you would think that. Native American populations, cultures, they really reflected the environment in which they lived. There were 10 kind of large cultural groups of natives based on their regions and environments. The North, which was kind of the Eskimo and Inuit, they're up in Alaska, up in northern Canada. Again, interestingly enough, closer to kind of the western side of Canada, which kind of adds the theory that they came from the land bridge that connected Alaska and Russia, at least modern day Alaska and Russia. So they were very much hunter-gatherer. The South was more kind of a farming, and we'll talk about it in a second. The Eskimos, they hunted seal, they hunted anything they could get their hands on. Almost 75% fat was in their diet, but they lived really rough conditions, so it was okay. Indians of the plains hunted bison and migrated and followed them around the region. The Wichita Tribe was a farming tribe. This was in the kind of center of what is the modern day area, like the Great Plains, Kansas, Texas, all the way from Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma. These are kind of the modern day states here. There were Indians of the plains and the Wichita Tribe. They kind of worked in coexistence. They would trade farming goods and agricultural goods for bison, which were big meat, and they depended on the bison, the Indians of the plains, for pretty much everything, like coats to food. Like, everything was covered there. It was a big deal and made it all the more devastating for their culture when the U.S. government tried to kind of kick them off their own land. They started killing the bison, which was a lifeblood of their own existence. So, but they did, of course, have to trade with the other more agricultural tribes closer to the south of the center of the country for more sustenance, because you can't just have meat all the time, as good as it is for our meat eaters out there. I know some people may be vegetarian, but that's okay. Northeastern Native Americans planted the Three Sisters: corn, squash, and beans. Remember, CSB for the Three Sisters there. And did some kind of slash and burn agriculture, which pretty much means if the soil is worthless, it does kind of tend to get worthless after a while, so they pretty much kind of move on to better soil. Women did farming, men did hunting, and that kind of surprised and disturbed some Europeans. They thought they were lazy, they weren't doing anything. But women, instead of just sitting up in the house all day, they actually got to do something. In the Native American culture, was a big surprise to Europeans because of the very, very different gender roles in which they had. But interesting thing in the Northeast is the Iroquois of the Northeast formed an alliance or a confederation of 5 separate groups. The Mohawks, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca peoples, and by the way, some of which are places in New York and mostly New York, I think upstate New York today. So that's a little fun fact to see their kind of influence there. They're incredibly important and were some of the inspiration for the Founding Fathers when they tried to make the United States what it is today. So that's a little interesting thing to kind of keep in your back pocket there. For the future, maybe make some connections off of that. The Iroquois lived in longhouses and viewed the government as kind of a longhouse, which this is kind of an analogy for them. These big multi-residential houses, and that was kind of and they all had to work together, exactly like the way they worked together in the Confederation to fight off warring tribes from the north, from the south, whatever the case may be. Across the Great Lakes, they had enemy tribes, and of course, when Europeans came in, they banded together with other Indians, and they even banded together with some Europeans to fight off their Indian enemies. It was kind of a mess. History is very much a gray matter. So The alliances definitely, though, helped them stay united. The Southwest Indian people lived in clay houses and grew maize, living in settled communities. They had a lot of kind of almost apartment buildings today where they had multiple smaller residences kind of made out of clay. Southeastern tribes also lived in cities that were settled, such as Cahokia, that were very, very advanced and highly populated, some even more than European cities at the time, like London, etc. So, yeah, that is kind of a brief rundown of what these tribes are all about. Interestingly enough, though, we talked about gender roles. Women were considered the kind of leaders of the household in most communities, such as the Iroquois. They owned the property, which to a European, like, their head would literally explode if they heard something like that. Well, I shouldn't say specifically owning the property, because Indians were much more kind of Marxist in a way. They didn't really believe in the idea of owning private property. That was kind of foreign to them. They believed land was a common resource, not an economic commodity. And the thing is, I mean, it kind of sounds nice if you look at it, but you have to live in the real world for a second. Wealth mattered really little in Indian societies, and generosity, sharing, stuff like that was far more important. How you like help others, that was like your character was a big part of the way Indian societies operated, and they had a pretty strong religion as well. Religious ceremonies were often held directly related to farming and hunting, like harvest ceremonies, stuff like that. Those who believed to hold special spiritual powers were often given extra respect and authority, but of course religions differ by culture. So yeah, women actually, they could engage in premarital sex and choose to divorce their husband, and most Indian societies were matrilineal, which again they carried down through the the female line. Men were often away on hunts, so women attended to the agricultural duties as well as the household duties, and that really changed a lot of that really disturbed kind of a lot of Europeans. They thought that the Indians lacked a genuine religion, which kind of made them be like, how can these people exist with a genuine religion? Like, we don't expect the Islamic people, but they still have a religion. Like, this is so crazy. Europeans claim that Indians, quote, didn't use the land, and they had no claim to it. So if there was gold under the land and they were just farming off the land, the Europeans would be like, oh, it doesn't matter. They're not taking the gold, so it's ours. It's okay. Like, that is the incredible part of it. So Europeans viewed Indian men as weak and Indian women as mistreated, because of course the Indian women did way more than the European women. So European men and Europeans just in general did not know how to handle it. So yeah. But those were not the only ways that really Europe and the Native American population differed from each other. The Europeans kind of included the notion of freedom, for whatever reason, really was just completely alien to Indian society. I mean, I think a lot of this was really just to kind of offer my own opinion to help we kind of understand it maybe a little bit better. I don't know. I think it's really kind of because, again, they just didn't really understand or know anything about the culture. Also, I think they came at it with a view of kind of just abject dislike, and they thought they were superior to the Indians just because they had these ships, they had the steel, they had the guns, they were able to take the gold, they were able to manipulate and enslave these people. So they probably thought that they just didn't get the idea of freedom. Although, I mean, they weren't going around enslaving people and taking people off each other's land. So their own land. European understanding of freedom was based on the ideas of personal independence, the ownership of private property, which are ideas that are kind of foreign to Indians. I mean, I think they definitely had their kind of different ideas of freedom, and freedom is really going to be a big central theme that we will be coming back to, I'm sure, over the course of our episodes this year. Because it is such a different thing, means so many different things to different people. The Indians were just much more of a community-based society. They had small communities that worked incredibly well together and well with other communities around them. As you saw with the confederations that were being formed, the longhouses that existed. That's how the Indian society functioned, but just completely different from the way the Europeans decided to do things, which is okay, except for when they just start to really clash. Europeans believed that to embrace Christ was to provide freedom from sin, and Christian liberty later had no connection later to the ideas of religious tolerance, and they were much more zealous in conversion